Well, hello again. Here we are. It's a beautiful sunny morning. We had some little bit of snow and rain yesterday. Everything's covered in a little bit of ice this morning, but that's typical for the end of November here in New Brunswick. She's a bit frosty, cool morning. We're getting some tips picked for making Christmas wreaths and garland and getting some firewood cut. And just waiting here for the crew to get in here, and we're going to yard up a little bit more wood. Now, I started a video series, or I intended to start a video series a couple of winters back entitled Campfire Tales. That would, it was my wish to tell some of the stories that I heard as a kid growing up about the logging camps and things that would happen on logging crews and stuff. There's when you get in an area like this that's been settled for as many 100 years as this has, and you get a lot of stories, the old folk stories and stuff that unfortunately they're being lost. If you ask any of the young generation right now today around this area, to tell you some stories about some of the things that happened years ago in the camps, you'd get a blank stare because it's not on a video game. But there's a good oral tradition of stories of unusual things and unique events that took place years ago that those stories are all being lost. So I'm going to endeavor to do a series of videos here and just bring to life or bring to record some of the old stories that I heard as a kid growing up. And the first one I'm gonna deal with is it's not really a story about old times, but it is a story about logging. I'm going to talk about the unusual things, the weird things that you come across in the woods, the things that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck a little bit because you can't really put a finger on it. You can't put an explanation on it. Now, years ago, I was working up in northern Alberta, up in the cold country, working up there on a mining job and staying in a remote camp, flying in, flying out. And I was working with a guy by the name of Dave. Good, solid guy, late 30s, just a good all-around worker, good, honest guy. And we were setting up generators and lighting plants around the mining site and the processing site. And so we got to know each other pretty good. Dave was he was into camping and hiking and fishing, and he lived up in northern BC, the Prince George area. And anytime you get a chance, he was out in the mountains camping or fishing. And so we were sitting in the lunchroom there one day, and Dave said to me, he said, "What's the strangest thing ever happened to you in the woods? The strangest thing you've ever seen?" I said, "Well, there's been a couple of things that comes to mind." Dave said, "I want to show you a video, some pictures." So he got his phone out. He showed me some pictures, and he told me the story of what it was. Him and a buddy were they went in this logging road, and there was a four-wheel drive trail that went down in toward this creek, and they had taken the Jeep and went down following this trail, and they were trying to get into this little lake to do some fishing. And in the process of crossing this little creek, they got the Jeep stuck. They were hung up. So they're working, trying to get the Jeep out of the truck or out of the creek. And the guy that was with him said, "Dave," he said, "look up on the mountain." He said, "What is that?" Now, up on the mountain above them, there was a heavy growth of trees come in from one side, and then it was just like a V come down the mountain. It was an old rock slide or avalanche had occurred years before. There wasn't much for trees on that section. And then the woods on the other side of that slide was a bit more sparse. But out on that rock slide, there was two somethings were crossing the slide. Now, the rock slide would have been more than a quarter of a mile up the mountain, and the mountain was fairly steep right there. It would have been Oh, it probably been a bit over a quarter of a mile up to where these things was crossing the road. But there was two of them. They were black, and they come out on the rock slide. They come about a quarter of the way across it, and then they stopped, and they were watching down into the creek where Dave and his friend were. And then they proceeded on across the slide. They went about halfway across, then they stopped again, and they stood there and they watched them down in the valley where they were. And then they started across, and they got almost to the trees, and the guy that was with Dave, he kind of let a hoop out of him. Well, when he did, the bigger of the two turned back, like it made 4 or 5 steps back onto the slide toward them, and the smaller one, it run into the trees, and then the bigger one, it turned and followed the smaller one into the trees. But you could see it going through the trees, going away from the slide. You could see them walking. Now here's the funny thing: the entire distance across that rock slide. I gotta move here a little bit so I get the sun's coming right in through them trees there. It's going to make it too light here. The entire distance across that rock slide that those two things went, they went on their hind legs. Now, I've seen a lot of animals, bears especially. Like, we've got the black bears here in eastern Canada. I know a black bear will go up on its hind legs. It'll walk, a little bit on its hind legs if it's snooping into something or scratching against a tree. But if they're going any distance, a bear will go on 4 feet. And I think the grizzly is probably the same across. The grizzly, with its bulk, it might not even go as far on its hind leg as what a black bear would. But whatever these things was, they crossed 250 to 300 yards at least of that rock slide, and then went into the woods, and you could see them going through the trees, and they never once went down on 4 legs. Whatever it was, they walked on 2 feet all the way across there. Now these things were big. I mean, at that distance, he had the camera zoomed. You could see them pretty good. They were a good size, and to look at them quick, you'd think, okay, that's a bear standing on its hind legs. But then when you consider how far they went on their hind legs, I don't think they were bears. I know there's stories on the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest of creatures that there's a lot of controversy of whether they exist or not. But I am 100% certain from watching that video and seeing the pictures. He had snapped a few pictures of it as well. I am 100% convinced that that was not bears on that mountainside. I don't know what they were. I ain't going to put a name on it. I ain't going to try and explain it. But I'm 100% convinced that he didn't have bears on that video. So then Dave looks at me. He said, well, what's the strangest thing ever happened to you in the woods? So I'm going to tell you. Summer of 1982, we were working this piece of ground right here. This is about 55 acres. It's out separate from the rest of our land. And that summer when we were working here, we had 2 horses yarding logs, and we had 2 cutters. And so it was more convenient for us, rather than try and trailer the horses in here in the morning. It was more convenient just to hook the horses on a wagon, and we had a John Deere wagon, a small rubber-tired wagon. We'd hook the horses on and drive in here. It's about a mile drive from the farm into this property, and there was some pretty good old woods roads that come up from the east, come westward, and then they swing north, and the road come in back about halfway on this property. Now, that summer I had a couple of saddle horses as well. I had a black mare. She was 7 or 8 years old, and I had one of her colts that was about 3 years old. And so a lot of the time I'd jump on the saddle horse and I'd come in. I'd be in here 15, 20 minutes before they got here with the team. And that summer was really hot and dry. And so for a good part of the summer, we were only allowed to work until dinner time. The government puts restrictions on logging operations where you have to shut everything down at dinner time, and so we'd leave home at dawn and be in here as early as possible, and then we'd work until 11:30, shut the saws off, and then I'd hang around after the other guys went home. I'd hang around here and just watch for sparks or fire, and then I'd go back home with the saddle horse. Now, when I come in with the saddle horse, I'd follow the roads up, coming from the east to the west. I'd follow them up, and then I'd cut cross country, and I had a trail. I'd come in out here on the southeast corner of this property, and just come through the woods. And there was one section out here I'd hit a road on neighboring property, come on that road a ways, and then I'd come through the woods here with the saddle horse and come out onto our road, which is just back here. So there's one morning I was coming in with the saddle horse, and it's about 5 o'clock in the morning, and where I was coming on the neighboring property that's south of this piece, the owner of that property had got some roads bullnose scraped up there a little bit the previous fall, and so the roads were still gravelly, and they weren't grown in with vegetation or anything. And there was one place on that road that the road kind of took a turn like that. Well, right on that turn, there was a heavy growth of balsam fir on the east side. You couldn't see down through the woods. Then the road took a turn and came in, went up a little bit of a knoll. You were coming right onto a hardwood ridge. Excuse me. That hardwood ridge was a little bit more open ground, but still there was a fair bit of balsam fir and spruce around through the hardwoods at that point. As I'm coming to that turn in the road, that horse she was a good woods horse. She didn't spook easy. I've rode right up on a bear before. The bear was in a patch of raspberry bushes beside a water hole, and I rode up beside the bear, and we didn't see it in the raspberry bushes until the bear stood up. And the horse, she never spooked. She trotted a little bit the next few yards out the road, and that was it. She was pretty solid. She didn't run from moose and deer and stuff like some horses will. But that morning we were coming in, and just as we were coming to that turn in the road, I heard something running from the east side, and it's coming fast, coming through the woods. That horse froze. I mean, she locked up. Every muscle in that horse is trembling just like that. And her nose, her nostrils must have been that big around. She was blowing and blowing. And whatever it was, I couldn't see it. The way it was down in the woods, coming through that thick woods, I couldn't see what it was, but it came kind of diagonal across, up out of that woods and crossed the road around this bend. So I never did get a look at it. And but that horse, she locked up, every muscle just quivering. And I thought, yes, sir, she's going to bolt, or she's going to take the bucking, and I'm going to be in a mess here. I'm going to have to hang on tight. But she didn't. She just locked up. She wouldn't move. And whatever it was went across the road ahead of us around that turn, and then I could hear it running up through the hardwood ridge, and it was going fast. Now, if you've been around the woods any length of time, you recognize the gait of different animals and stuff, and it wasn't a deer. A deer will bound. You'll hear the thump, thump, thump. It wasn't a moose. A moose will break, branches and thrash and bang, and even a bear runs different. You learn to recognize the sound of a bear running. It wasn't anything that I recognized, and it went across the road and went up through. After it went up enough that I couldn't hear it, the horse, she's got her head up, her ears perked right up. She's still listening. She can still hear it going. So I nudged her in the ribs to try and get her to go around the turn. I wanted to get a look at what it was. She would not move. She was locked right up tight. And I nudged her 3 or 4 times, and after a bit, she'd take a couple of steps and then she'd stop. Then she'd take a couple of steps and she'd stop again. And she was still watching up through the woods. And I mean, her nostrils are that big, like I say. She was tense. And so after about Oh, it took about 10 minutes before she would go again. And so we went around the turn in the road, and we come to the face of that little knoll. Now, most of this ground up in here is gravelly and real rocky, and but the face of that knoll was sandy, looser gravel. In the gravel, there's 3 or 4 footprints, and they look like human footprints. And I stopped, and I'm looking at them, and I can't believe what I saw. So I got off, and I'm holding the reins tight because the horse wants to go to the barn. She didn't want to be there, and so I got off, and I got down and looked at the footprints, and you can see the full shape of a foot with the toe prints, and the road was probably 12, 14 feet wide. Whatever it was hit right at the edge of the roadway, and it hit 2 more times, and then the heel hit just going off the roadway. So it was taking a pretty good stride, but the prints was sunk down in the gravel about that far. Whatever it was hitting the ground hard, but it was a bare foot in the shape of a human foot. Now, this area here is not heavy populated, and anything that goes on here, everybody hears it. If there was somebody lost in the woods, we would have known about it. Um, it's unheard of for anybody to be camping in here because this is all private land, and we're in the woods enough. Well, us guys that summer, we were traveling here every day, twice a day, and if anybody was in here camping, we would have heard them. We would have known they were there. Um, it's also highly unusual that anybody around here would be going in their barefoot. Now, I grew up here. I got 59 years in on this neck of the woods, and I can tell you, I've almost never seen anybody going in their bare feet here. So what that was, or who that was, I have no clue. I mean, 5 o'clock, just coming dawn in this woods, running in bare feet, and the direction they were running away from the settlement. I mean, if they continued on the course that they were heading, um, it's about 100 miles before you get to the next houses in that direction. Um, what it was, who it was, what they were doing, has still got me scratching my head 40 years later. I have no clue what I seen or what I heard that morning. I have no clue what or who made those tracks, um, why they would be running through the woods there, why they ran so hard. You know, from their position where they were coming, they might have even been able to see me on the horse. Um, why they ran away from me that way, or for that matter, was it even human? I don't know. Um, all I know is 4 tracks in the gravel that was in the shape of a human foot, and whatever it was, my horse was terrified of it. So that's my story. One of the weirdest things I ever came across in the woods. So if you like this type of story, hit the like and subscribe button. Leave a comment below. You know, what have you seen in the woods that you can't explain, that you can't put a finger on? What's some of the stories that you've heard? Um, I really like comments and interaction with the videos. So anyway, that's it for today. Got work to do. Stay safe and enjoy. Until next time.